Hi, my name's Phil Naylor and welcome to Tea with a Therapist. It's a beautiful spring May day here, so I decided to go for a hike and walked out on my back 40, and it's a beautiful day for this, so I thought I would do it outside, get out of that old winter stodgy place. And I must confess I don't have tea today, I've got Gatorade, so anyway, better for the hike. So anyway, thanks for joining me. I'm Phil Naylor. I'm a psychotherapist. I do a weekly little talk here on all things mental health and mental wellness and understanding ourselves. Involves personal development and a whole range of other things. So my topic for today, just a disclaimer that this is just my opinion stuff. It's not psychotherapy. This is just my wisdom, the stuff, my experience that I've gathered over my years of 20 years or so of working in the mental health field. So today's topic is on relationships. I've had a couple of inquiries about relationships and having me talk about relationships. I had one this week. It just said assertiveness in relationships. So there wasn't any further information about that. So I'm not quite sure what that meant. So I'm going to use my own take on that, because there's a different ways to take that. Should you be assertive in relationships? What do you do if the other person's being assertive? What's appropriate assertiveness? What's inappropriate assertiveness? Because we often, confuse assertiveness with aggressiveness and those sorts of things. So anyway, I hope this sounds okay. There's a little bit of a babbling brook kind of effect here, but I'm hoping that you can hear me okay. And I must say that I'm not a relationship therapist. That's not kind of my area of expertise, although I do some couples counseling, as long as it's not too kind of deep and heavy. If it's this can this marriage be saved sort of thing, I will sort of refer it on to somebody who has expertise in more marital therapy. So I come from more of counseling light in terms of working with couples, and also drawing on my own personal experience. Been married almost 40 years now, and been through a lot of different stages and different experiences through that, and we have survived it and am in a good place. So I use that experience as well to inform how I work with people, and just in terms of putting my own views forward on relationships and how they work, and all the little patterns that we have in them. Basically, the way I inform all people of what I work with in couples is that working on relationship is really working on yourself, because there's no way to escape that. We are confronted with ourselves when we are dealt with a partner. And the closer the relationship, the more serious it is. Like if you're in a dedicated relationship and you want that to work out in the long term, you're going to go out of your way to sometimes really work at those challenges. And the challenges that we have in relationships are things that we ourselves get challenged with. If you're living with somebody, there's no way you can just kind of float along and just be who you are if you were single. And that's what I think is the beauty of relationships, is they actually help us to grow and develop as individuals, because you have to change yourself when you're working with somebody else. For one thing, they're going to spot things in you that you wouldn't spot in yourself. Your partner knows you intimately, so you know all your flaws, they know all your ins and outs. They may have their own particular perspective, but you kind of can't get away with stuff. I was at a conference just yesterday, and the speaker was saying, my wife knows when I'm looking at my computer and I'm talking to her on the phone. She can tell if I'm paying attention to her or not. So we get to know just the this minor details and little nuances of people. We know when they're paying attention or not, even if we can't see them. So our partners kind of know us, and we can't get away with stuff. We can't fake stuff. You kind of put on the air. You kind of have your social face that you do when you're at work or with socializing with people or whatever. They see all of you, the real you, and all of that. So one thing, they reflect that back on. You can't get away with stuff. And also, if you have to address issues in a relationship, you're also confronting your own issues, because if there's something uncomfortable that you need to deal with, you have to deal with your own discomfort around that. oh, addressing that with people, what's that going to do? Is that going to affect our relationship? I'm afraid to address that. What if they get upset? What am I going to do? And so we get in front of it with our own little fears and insecurities about addressing problems or not. And often we're confronted with these dilemmas. Do I let this thing slide? Is it important? Or do I need to address this? And if there's there's different types of relationships. Some people are the let's everything slide type of thing. And that's not, I don't believe, it's healthy relationships. And once in a while you get people say, oh, we never argue, we never fight. And to me, that's not good. Sounds good. Everybody kind of wants that. But really, that to me, that's you're either not dealing with stuff that needs to be dealt with, or you're ignoring things, or just not taking them on, or you just kind of I'm just going to live and let live kind of thing. But you're actually not helping the other person. If the other person has an issue, if there is an issue in the relationship that needs to be addressed, it affects both of you. No matter what you think, it affects both of you. And if it's an important issue, you kind of need to take that up. That person's kind of drinking too much or something. You can say, well, that's just them. They just drink too much. That's their problem. But it affects you. And if you've got kids, it affects them. And it also affects your partner. And there may be things going on with them that would be good for them to address, that they actually need to address, but they're avoiding through their drinking problem or whatever. And so by taking them on and pushing them about, don't you think you're drinking too much kind of thing, then you have to go through that whole sort of defensiveness thing, and I'm not, and I can do what I want, and all these sorts of things. But really, if it's not good for their health, it's not good for, they're not coping with things, they may not be dealing with stress, right? And if you really hang in there on an issue, that helps the other person. And same vice versa. There's issues that you need to deal with in yourself. And if you have another partner that pushes on, you can go a long time if you're living by yourself and have an issue and just not deal with it. But if you're living with somebody, they're going to push you on that. Or it's going to affect the relationship, and they're going to leave or something. So you're confronted with these things that in yourself that you need to start to address. And so when we work with a partner, it exposes the things that we need, either because they're pointing them out, or that we're confronted with our own angst and our own issues when we have to think about confronting an issue with another person. And so this issue about assertiveness, let's talk about that one. What is that? Generally, it's good to be assertive in a relationship, in the sense of you don't want to be aggressive, but you want to assert your needs. You want to make sure that you're kind of just not complying with everything, and that you're going along with what the other person wants all the time, and you're suppressing your own needs and desires and issues, for the sake of not rocking the boat or whatever. So you need to assert your needs. You need to communicate what you need and want in a relationship. And so you have to be appropriately assertive. Now, the assertiveness is kind of an art too, because you can address an issue with somebody, but you could do it in a very blunt, kind of not very nice way. And sometimes when we have with our partners and your immediate families, we tend to be more blunt and, a lot more blunt and not less nice saying things than we would if it was like a colleague at work or somebody, or your neighbor or something like that. And so sometimes we have to watch, and we have to watch how our other partners work with us too, because they're assertive in a not very tactful way. And we want to make sure if we have an issue that we are addressing it tactfully. But we do address it, right? And so we want to self-monitor ourselves that we're doing these things appropriately, and so that we are making sure that we understand our needs, we assert them properly. If we see an issue, that we address those in the relationship. And we do sometimes need to call our partners on things, just like they need to call us on things. And when they call us on things and we really address something, if there's an issue that I need to deal with that I'm not addressing, it's good that I address that. It's good that I see that and figure it out. And if I start to address an issue that really is an issue, that makes me a better person. If I overcome that, I've grown in that, you know. And the more you change, you start to develop in yourself. You start to see your own issues. You can develop. I think the better person you become, because it's a constant improvement. And so you help your partner do that as well. But again, it has to be done tactfully. When it's issues of assertiveness of the other person in the relationship, we have to make sure that that's appropriate assertiveness and not aggressiveness, or that, like I was saying earlier, that if we're always living by somebody else's agenda, you know, oh, we're going to do this weekend, and then we're going to go do that, and this is that, we're making all the plans. And so even if they're not aggressive, that they're just kind of just taking over, and your needs aren't being met, and they're being assertive in the relationship in that they want things this way and they want things that way at the expense of what you want, or that you end up just not getting your needs met, then there's, you know, then you need to address that kind of assertion. You need to assert yourself, and that again makes you grow. And you also need to address that in the other person, that, hey, you need to create some room for me in this plan, in how we live our lives, right, in our day-to-day. And so you have to monitor, as the other person assertiveness dominating the relationship. So there's lots to know about relationships, and I always say that, you know, the fundamental thing when a couple comes to me and are needing help, it usually boils down, if you really boil it down to the essential, what's the essential message about what's going on, is one or both people feel like the other doesn't care about them, you know, and they'll have a laundry list of things. See, this person does this, and that, and they don't care about me. And the other person has their own perspective. Well, you're doing these other things and you don't care about me. Or there's one person who's the problem, okay? The problem person. Look what they're doing. They're drinking, or they're doing whatever it is that they have the problem. And if they just stop doing that, if they just fix the problem, we'd be okay, okay? So just stop doing that stuff. And counselor, can you tell the person that they're wrong and just stop doing those things, or so on? And sometimes they are doing things that are pretty not good, and they do kind of need to stop doing them. But that's really not, that's not the whole problem, though. We're only ever looking at one side of the equation, because the other person has ways of playing into that. There's codependency issues. There's all kinds of dynamics that get played in when there's the problem person. Or they're both the problem. They both have a laundry list, you know. Look at all these things you do. Well, look at all these things that you do, you know. But it boils down to the other person. Often what is at the heart of it, people can adapt to a lot of things, but if they feel that the other person doesn't care about them, then that is really the thing that causes pain. It's that the partner, the person who's supposed to love me, isn't doing these things that I feel that I'm being loved. They're neglecting me on some level. They're not making me important, or they're denigrating me or something. And so the thing about that is that oftentimes is that each person has their own particular way of both expressing and feeling that the things that make them feel loved or cared about. And they're usually different for each partner. So often you may say something like, here's something like, you don't care about me, you do all these things, and the other person says, what do you mean I don't care about you? I do all this. Look, I make your lunch, and I bring you tea, and I do this, that, and the other thing for you, do all the laundry, and I do all these things. What do you mean I don't care about you? And the thing is that those things that that person's doing are actually the things that would make them feel cared about if somebody did them. That's how they express being cared about and how they would receive being cared about. But for the other person, they may think, well, yeah, that's nice and all, but that's not what makes me feel cared about. You know, what would make me feel cared about is if, you know, if I came in at home and you gave me a kiss and asked me how my day was, or something like that. And you never do that. You're not into, as soon as I get in the door, you start to give me orders and give me the list of tasks to do or whatever. So we're not speaking the language of each other. We're not giving each other what we need to feel cared about. And so we each need different kinds of things that make us feel cared about. And so part of the solution to this is that each person has to try and figure out what it is that makes the other person feel cared about, and then deliver that to them sometimes. So if the other person tries to make you feel cared about by doing stuff for you, then try doing stuff for them, because that's what makes them feel cared about. But if the other person, what makes them feel cared about is, the hug and the kiss when they come home, or spending some time right after supper together, and they deliver that, that's what makes them feel. So you have to kind of read the other person and deliver to the other person what it is they need. So that's just sort of very basic. And often we find out that we have the same needs, that we, on some level, we find a partner that kind of provokes us in the areas that we are challenged in already, that we don't feel cared about, or that they neglect us in a particular way, even though they're not intending to do that, in a particular way that resonated with a past way we were neglected. And so we use our relationships to try and fill needs that were unmet at an earlier stage in life. So anyway, I've just sort of touched base on some relationship stuff. I don't know if this resonates with people, or if this is the kind of thing that people need, but relationships are tricky. They're more of an art than a science. And the thing is that people change in relationships. As we age, we naturally change, and are things that we're interested in, the things that are motivating us. We have the stage of life issues. Sometimes we have kids in the picture. Sometimes we have no kids. The kids are grown. So relationships are always changing and developing. So we change individually, and the other person changes. And sometimes we have to kind of regroup around our relationship and where are we at now. What have we learned from the past? And how do we cultivate a good relationship now? So sometimes you have to stop and take stock. I always say relationship is like a garden. It needs to be cultivated. So you just can't plant a garden and just expect that it's, going to be an amazing garden. You got to weed it and you got to tend it. So, I guess that's the kind of gardens I plant. I plant them and they tend to just get weeded over because I don't weed them. I love gardening. I just don't like to weed. But unfortunately, weeding is most of gardening. So, but anyway, if you want a good garden, if you want to be a good gardener, you have to tend it. And there's different things you do at different stages of that garden. In the springtime, you're just planting seeds and watching the new flowers come up and maybe transplanting new seeds. And as the season goes on, you have to weed that garden. You have to mulch the garden. And come the fall, you're harvesting and cleaning up the garden. So there's different things. But basically, we do have to tend a garden. You have to weed the garden and give it fertilizer and just tend to the garden. Otherwise, it just does get overgrown with weeds. And in relationships like that, we have to tend it, or it gets grown over with the weeds. But general advice is that if you have issues in your relationship that needs to be dealt with, you need to deal with them. So you're better to be assertive in your relationships to make sure that issues that need to be addressed are addressed. And sometimes you have to persist with that too. You have to know, is this a real thing? If we got real communication problems, or that person doesn't communicate in this relationship, well, they need to start communicating. And that's an important thing, and you're going to have to persist on that issue. And it's good for that person because they need to know how to communicate better. They need to express their feelings. They can't get stuck in their old patterns. Okay? And if you care about each other, that kind of relationship that you have, that it's important that you have a good relationship, then you need to invest that time and energy, and you need to take on the things that need to be taken on. And so be assertive in your relationships when an issue needs to be tended to and it's not being addressed. And be persistent, don't be ugly, be tactful and use all of those sorts of means, but persistence is important. and that part's important. And boundary setting, of course, is important. If the other person isn't being respectful or is doing not good things, if they're bordering on abusive or whatever, of course you have to be assertive to set good boundaries. But then you also have to address that problem, what's going on with them, that they're doing this in the first place. So lots to do in relationships. They keep you very busy, and but I believe that they're an important part of our personal development, our psychological development. Just like having kids is important, I think, too, that you learn a lot through having kids that you wouldn't if you didn't have kids. That doesn't mean that single people or anything, there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that all these life experiences and challenges of relationships are important, and we can grow from them fast, not necessarily easily, but they help us to grow into better people if we use it that way to help us grow. So that's Tea with a Therapist 16 today. So thank you for joining me. Please give a like or make a comment or something if you are enjoying these, or make any more suggestions that you would like for further topics. So thank you for joining me, and I'll try and do more outdoor ones. I think I like this. Okay. We'll see you next week. Thanks.